When you are feeding athletes a diet of perceptual information that looks nothing like what they're going to come up against in the field, you are preparing them for an environment that does not look like the sport that they are preparing for. This video is part 2 of a 2-part series giving some thoughts on the strength and conditioning preparation for Auburn University Football. If you've not yet seen part 1, please click the link and watch that video. If you have, sit back and enjoy part 2 of this series. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, and comment. When we get to the actual sprinting portion, we see quite a lot of emphasis on acceleration, resisted methods of sprinting. It makes sense. Obviously, football is going to be primarily an acceleration-based sport more than it is top end. Most athletes that hit top end speed in the game of football are special teamers. Most football players don't come close to like 85 to 90% of top speed. However, you can make a strong case to still train top end speed in football players just because of hamstring robustness, increased efficiency at submaximal speed, and that kind of like raising tide that lifts all boats. If you increase top end speed, you're probably going to increase acceleration along with it. And I think Ken Clark has written about this in his research. This progression that you see of the march to the bound to the run, I actually learned this at Exos back in the day. I don't know if Auburn got it from Exos, but after a couple of years, I personally abandoned this progression as outlined by Exos just because you actually see it in this video. The march, the bound, and the run look so dissimilar that I'm not sure there's a lot of transfer coming from one to the other. They're such distinct tasks because obviously when you're marching, there's always one foot in the floor, but when you get to the bound and the run, there has to be projection of the body and there is going to be a flight phase. So my preference now is just to start with the bound or even start with a run, do it slower and easier with less projection, and then just build over time because we're just watering down the same task that it is we're trying to improve. One thing that I really like in this video is that there is competition and intent in everything that the guys are doing. Once you've cemented a decent level of technique and you've earned the right to compete with other athletes, we know that with speed, strength, and power, especially speed, we have to be hitting these very, very high intensities if we're going to deliver the kind of stimulus that is going to elicit adaptation from the body. And of course, competition is one way to do this. When you're dealing with high-level athletes, especially teenagers, especially male athletes, they're going to want to compete with one another, and that is automatically going to push up the effort level from everyone involved. Often the tricky thing as a coach is just managing this, not letting it descend into just a lactate bath where it gets sloppy, but it looks from this video that they've done a great job of avoiding these things. The pursuit drill through the hoops is another example, in my opinion, of game speed. Being able to run very, very fast whilst changing direction, whilst running a curve, whilst having the pressure of competition. These are all skills that have to be learned if athletes are going to get every drop out of their speed potential on the field of play. A really consistent theme throughout this video is the understanding of the constraints-led approach to motor learning. You can see this here in the hoop run. It can be very, very difficult sometimes to try and cue an athlete to a particular movement strategy. And honestly, a lot of the time, athletes don't care what you have to say. It just goes in one ear and out the other. But what you can do is you can allow an athlete to self-organize to the solution that you want to see via manipulation of the task or the environment. And that's what you see on this hoop run. By placing an object inside the hoop that the athlete has to get to the outside edge of his foot, change his body angle, lean and reach to pick up, he's going to get into the positions that you want to see in this drill, but you haven't had to say anything. And this learning tends to be more vivid and sticky because he's got himself into that position and he's going to have that awareness rather than you have to guide him into that position. It's a consistent theme that you see throughout this video, and it's really, really good. As I said in the Nebraska video, one of the things that I really like to emphasize during early prep, I call it like being a 3D athlete. To me, the goal is to be able to produce, transmit, and absorb force. I know we don't say absorb force, through all ranges of motion in all different directions so that we're just kind of covering our bases. One of the things I believe, but I can't prove as a coach, is that the range that you do not train in is the one that you're typically going to get hurt in, and the same goes for direction of force. So we see in the plyo and jump section here a really good blend of directions, force vectors, horizontal, vertical. We also see different muscular regimes. So we're seeing reactive continuous reps, we're seeing pauses. So this is just a good coverall. We're getting a really good broad base of development in these exercises, and presumably down the line we can narrow this, increase the intensity, and get more specific for athletes' positions. Another thing that I really like about this video is you can see as this guy is finishing these repeat broad jumps, he's looking to see what his measurement is. You would be surprised at the number of high-level programs that do not measure week in and week out. What typically happens is they just do the program and then they test maybe 3 or 4 times a year. If you imagine a situation where, God forbid, you've made all these bad decisions in the programming and the athlete's not responding or even getting worse, why would you want to wait 3 or 4 months down the line to realize that you made that mistake and not be able to adjust? So regular testing throughout the program serves 2 purposes in my opinion. One is that it provides you with the feedback to iterate and adjust your programming as you go along. And second, and probably more importantly, is that when you measure athletes, they have this awesome habit of putting forth more effort into what they're doing. I think one of the best things about velocity-based training, about measuring jumps, about getting out the speed gates, is that athletes will automatically raise their effort level. They're going to deliver a stronger training stimulus, and you're going to get more bang for your buck in terms of adaptation. So this is really, really good. Now we're getting to the weight room portion. As I said, you can see from the jumps and the plyos that there's this big emphasis on being a 3-dimensional athlete, and the same is true in the weight room. I personally really like this crossover lunge to lateral lunge exercise. Again, it's one of those things that I believe but I can't prove. But I honestly believe that you manage ACL risk and groin risk when you expose athletes to regular loaded frontal plane work. And quite frankly, in this video, you're going to see more unilateral and frontal plane work than a lot of programs do in an entire year. So I personally really like this. Before we get back to the weight room stuff, I really like this resisted crossover run. When you look at the on-field activity of the DBs and sometimes the middle linebackers as well, the ability to maintain speed in one direction whilst having a rotated torso to stay square to attackers or be able to perceive your environment is it's a prominent action, it's a KPI, and in that situation, why wouldn't you train it, why wouldn't you develop it, and why wouldn't you measure it? So there's just generally a lot of hamstring work in this program, both hip dominant, so hinging, and knee dominant, so knee flexion. You see RDLs, you see single leg RDLs, you see Nordics, you see single leg curls with sliders and whatnot. Again, we're covering our bases and it makes sense. The most common non-contact injury in field-based sports, including football, is hamstring tears, and we know from research that strength at length, i.e. relative eccentric strength at the extremes of range of motion, is going to be a risk factor for hamstring injuries. Does a Nordic hamstring reflect the mechanics of a hamstring tear? Is it super specific for making athletes robust to this situation? No, it is not. Has anyone ever produced a study that showed that Nordics increase hamstring injuries? No. Have many of the studies shown that they reduce them significantly? Yes. So it's a low stakes bet to make as a strength coach, and it's a smart decision to program them. So we've already seen one chain-based exercise with the back squat. We know the reason for this. It's accommodating resistance. It's to force athletes to accelerate into the bar to maintain that bar speed as we get to the extremes of the range of motion. But now we see this lunging exercise with the chains suspended off the floor and swinging around. If the chains do not touch the floor, it ceases to be an accommodating resistance tool and it starts to be a stabilization and balance development tool. So you can absolutely make a case for this. During unilateral exercise, we have to be able to produce force in one plane, the sagittal, and control or manage force in the other two, the frontal and the transverse planes. However, remember the reason that you're really doing this exercise is for the development of strength and power and all that other good stuff. It's not for the stabilization and the balance. So the extent to which you see it in this video is appropriate and fine in my opinion. And it goes too far when you see circus tricks by like Alvin Kamara and all that other stuff that you see on Instagram. Again, seeing these pre-planned movements on the field. If there's a way that we can create that metabolic stimulus whilst addressing other goals within the program, technically, tactically, psychologically, great. If we can't for NCAA regulations or whatever, so be it. But again, it's just a small detail, and overall, this program is super impressive. When you see the parachutes here, I don't get it. If you look at parachutes, they're absolutely horrible because you have to build up to close to top speed for the resistance to take effect. Once you get to top speed, you're really concerned with vertical force production rather than horizontal force production, which obviously the parachute is going to elicit. You can see from the guy on the left, the parachute's like waving around and hitting the ground. Don't know why you would select this when you've got run rockets on hand, when you've got sleds on hand, or even just bands. I think this may be just trying out ideas, exposing athletes to new pieces of equipment to keep them engaged, all that kind of stuff, but personally I would not pick this. So we see these jump mats being used. Athletes are not dumb. If you assess them and measure them in a particular manner, they're going to find out a way to game the system. They've obviously figured out that jump mats give you your score based on an equation that uses flight time. So you see athletes tucking their knees, as everyone does with jump mats, to inflate their score. 42.5 inches would be absolutely insane for a vertical jump. I'm sure there are athletes in the SEC that are capable of this, but I don't think this athlete's jumping 42.5. But as I said, if this is being used as a tool to motivate athletes, put a spotlight on them, and get effort from them, great. If we are using this to measure and assess performance or infer how well the program is working, I think there are other tools available that would be more valid and reliable. Namely, the old school Vertec. It's really, really hard to cheat this as long as you get the reach setup part done right, or using takeoff velocity from force plates. It's just really, really hard to cheat this, but it's much cheaper to get 10 jump mats, for example, than it is to get 10 force plates. So from a logistical standpoint, you could maybe get away with this, but for the reasons that I said, athletes are going to cheat, and it kind of ruins the results a little bit. A couple of things that you see from this weight room program. One is that on the big lifts, there is a lot of intent. They're accelerating into the bar. We know that we're going to adapt more to this than if we just lift at a sub-maximal speed. We're going to recruit fatigue and adapt more high threshold motor units by doing this. Second is that there is a big technical emphasis in this program. You can tell that these athletes are all well coached. Nothing sloppy going on in this program from the looks of it, or if it is, they were smart enough not to upload it. Another thing that I really like in this program is that you can see there is a lot of the exercise being adapted to fit the athlete. They're not putting square pegs into round holes with this program. You see some athletes are front squatting, some are back squatting, some are doing belt squats. So clearly what's happening is we're looking at, well, what are the injury limitations? What are the likes and dislikes of this athlete? What does their body shape lend itself to? And how can we pick an exercise that's gonna fit the bill and deliver the stimulus that we want? So this is really, really good. We're getting now to the pump up section. We can see a little bit of bodybuilding work. Absolutely nothing wrong with this. I think sometimes comments that I make online make people think that I never do this or I don't like it. I do like it because one, it gets buy-in from teenage athletes. Two, it's almost like the piece of candy that you offer kids if they eat their vegetables first. And when athletes look and feel good, they're going to have confidence and enthusiasm elsewhere within the program. The problems arise when it ends up becoming the program and the thing that you hang your hat on, which clearly is not the case in this video, but that is the case in other programs elsewhere within other sports and the rest of the country. They're pushing horizontally and vertically, they're pulling horizontally and vertically. You've got some knee dominant stuff in there, you've got some hip dominant stuff, bilateral, unilateral, you have frontal plane, you have rotational work, creating rotation and preventing rotation. That's basically all of your bases covered, and then obviously we have ballistic power work on top. That is just a really solid, well-coached, well-loaded, well-thought-out training program. Lastly, a little bit here on this flashing lights reaction drill. To me, this is not helping them build the OODA loop for football. So the OODA loop, observing your environment, deriving meaning from it via how you process information, inferring the intent of the opposition, selecting your response and executing it at speed. when you are feeding athletes a diet of perceptual information that looks nothing like what they're going to come up against in the field, you are preparing them for an environment that does not look like the sport that they are preparing for. It could be just a little bit of sizzle that sells the steak. It's shiny and new, it gets athlete enthusiasm, but do I think it's making them better for football? No. Is it reactive? Sure, but I still don't think it's making them better for football. Again, though, you may have to balance this against NCAA regulations where if it looks too much like football or too much like sport practice, one, it's going to piss off compliance, and two, you may be upsetting sport coaches who say, well, why are you suddenly doing our job for us? And this does happen. Overall, though, I thought this video was super impressive. Great technique, great execution, great thought process that you can infer from this. Easy to understand how they won a national championship. So bravo, Ryan Russell, and thanks for uploading. As ever, if you want to see another video in this series, drop a comment below and we'll get it lined up. Otherwise, please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks. Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. Why don't you celebrate by watching more just like it? You can also help us on our quest to placate the algorithm gods by liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting. Thanks.